Coming to you live from the Now Media Newsroom.
I'm Jim Check. You're watching Now Media. With me, Brenda Bailey, the Finance Minister of British Columbia. Thank you, Brenda, for joining me. It's a long-awaited for interview. I really appreciate it as well.
Thank you for having me on.
We've got lots of questions. We're going to try to go through these fairly quickly. We were going to talk about the budget, but that's kind of it's been a while back, so we're going to focus on some of the other things on going forward. But first off, I want to kind of set the table. What drives you? Like, what is Brenda Bailey, or what's the BC government's main focus when you guys are deriving policy? Like, who do you direct most of these policies to? Because what is I guess the mission of the BC NDP?
Well, that's a very big question, but I think the way that I would tackle it is, what is the job that David Eby has assigned me to? Which I accepted last December, and that is to do a couple of things. One, to drive down our deficit in the province and lead the work to do that. And two, make sure that our debt metrics compare favorably to all the other provinces. So those are the two things that I'm most deeply focused on. And we're doing a lot of work to bring down deficit, and in many, many different ways. We've got a hiring freeze on. We're doing evaluations in every single ministry to make sure that we're getting the outcomes that are funded in programs, and removing programs that aren't reaching their outcomes. We're doing a lot of work to ensure that the health authorities are running efficiently. We're doing work on all of our Crown agencies. So all across government, looking to ensure that efficiency is happening, and that any dollars that aren't being well spent are being pulled back in. We're also looking, not in my ministry, but across government, focusing on driving up revenue. And that's really about ensuring that our debt metrics change. And so that's the work that I've been driving since being in this role.
So you're more in a cost-cutting role, and then you're trying to support the other ministries in driving revenue. Is that kind of a good way to sum that up then?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
So part of the thing in British Columbia and in Canada, we're seeing capital kind of flee British Columbia and Canada. How do we go about attracting capital? Like, what can you do as finance minister, and what can your party do to kind of make British Columbia more attractive to corporations looking to invest, billions of dollars, because that's what we need right now?
Yeah, and there's a number of different things that we're doing. One is, obviously the question of certainty is perpetually in play, and that's in play in a number of different ways. The trade war that we're in has created a lot of uncertainty. Everyone knows that. But another piece around certainty is the relationship with First Nations and how to get big projects done. And that's an area that's been a deep focus for our government, and we've had some success. And so what we see is that any major project coming into British Columbia will do so with a First Nation proponent, and we're seeing some success in that. Another piece is really looking at how we create the environment for businesses to succeed, and we're doing reviews on red tape reduction, for example, which is a really important piece. We've also got a number of different ways to help support particular industries in their growth. We stood up an organization called InBC, which is a $500 million strategic investment fund that's made investments in all kinds of different businesses, and also directly in some VC funds as well. One example might be a company called Forage, which is actually from the middle of the province and uses robotics to farm mushrooms, which received an investment from NBC to help them grow. So there's many
we had
different
them
ways.
speak at a conference we had, actually. Yeah, we highlighted them. There you go.
Yeah, they're seeing some really good growth. So we can have a role in helping businesses scale through NBC, but there's a lot of other programming that we do for up-and-coming businesses to support them in their growth.
What do you say to the critics, though, that say BC is not competitive when compared to the jurisdictions in Alberta, and then some even in Washington, and that says BC is not competitive because of taxation, and then just the regulation, and then businesses also not being represented in policy decisions? And I've heard this critique of the BC NDP many times, including from forestry, and then you and I talked about forestry in the past, is that industry doesn't get to sit at the table when policy decisions are being made.
Yeah, well, what I would say is I think under David Eby that we're working hard to change a lot of those criticisms and to invite people to the table. Eby, after this last election, I attended with him the very next day a speech that he gave to the Chambers of Commerce in British Columbia, in which he said he just had a near-death experience. And what he meant was, what a slim majority. Like we really just got in by one seat. And he took that to mean that we need to do better for businesses. And so we've been involved in that work. There's a lot going on to bring businesses in more closely, and we're looking at ways to really ensure that businesses can be successful here in British Columbia.
There's critics that will say, and I've had them on the show here, that say that since the BC NDP has been in power, there's 33 new forms of taxation put on businesses. What can you point to that's relief for businesses, though, like for the broader base? I know that there's specific industries that you've targeted, but what about for the broader base of businesses? What can you point to and say, this is why you need to do business in BC?
Well, let's be clear about those taxes, because a lot of them are doing specific things that are helpful for the population of British Columbia. Let's talk about one, the speculation and vacancy tax. Yes, it's a new tax, but what does it do? It makes housing more available for British Columbians. In my riding alone, 30,000 new homes available for people. And guess what? Those people work at people's businesses. If you can't attract people because they don't have somewhere to live, that's going to hurt your business. So yes, we're bringing in some additional taxations, but often they're supportive. Housing is important to people. So the work that we're doing there is actually supportive of businesses. And I would argue a lot of the work that we're doing on things like daycare are also supportive to businesses. We've also got one of the lowest small business tax rate in the country. We've protected that for businesses. That tax rate came about, the 2%, when we brought in the carbon tax. We got rid of the carbon tax, but we've still kept that low tax rate for small businesses. And that's because they're important to us, and we know how important they are as a driver in our economy. So there's much things at play that we do to support small businesses every day.
I know you're not going to like this question, but it is Kelowna, and you know I'm going to ask it. I just did an interview with a small business. He has 3 restaurants, and he said one of his restaurants failed, and he pointed straight at your Airbnb policy, and he says that Kelowna needs a made in Kelowna solution. Tourism down again here in British Columbia, or sorry, in Kelowna, and he pointed to one business alone that saw a drop of $300,000 in revenue, and his business was in the bottom, commercial retail buildings, and there was an Airbnb building in the past, and he said it was mainly empty. And so he said that he had to choose between the 3. He closed one, and he's hoping he can keep the other 2 open. But he does point to the Airbnb policy. And even a candidate that ran here for Loyal Woodridge that ran for the NDP said that Kelowna needs a made in Kelowna solution. And our vacancy rate is a lot higher now here in Kelowna.
Yeah, Airbnb is a very controversial topic in Kelowna, and I've heard from folks on this topic many times. But look, here's what we know. There was a study that happened at McGill University that showed that when Airbnb and other similar type of solutions came into the market, they increased rent by 30%. We have some of the highest rents in British Columbia of anywhere, and it just isn't sustainable for people. So we really feel that this policy is addressing big challenges in housing, and it's the right decision. And it's not right for everyone. We understand that unfortunately there are people who are being negatively impacted by it. But for the most part, it is helping people. It's helping people find housing they can afford. And we've seen rent come down every month since. The proof is in the pudding. This policy is beneficial.
The vacancy rate, one of the policies the Liberals did do that was really well done was no GST on purpose-built rentals. And we've seen lots of rentals being built here in Kelowna. But what's not selling in Kelowna right now is the developments. The cranes are coming down. They're not going back up. And a lot of people that I've talked to, especially developers, say that this market will not draw investment capital right now. And they point to the Airbnb policy. And that study that you quote, and is that the same study that was actually funded by the BC Hotel Association? Is that the study?
No.
There's a study that you quoted before that was funded by the BC Hotel Association, though.
The study I'm referring to is out of an academic institution.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that a lot of what people are experiencing right now in the housing market is, and in regards to building, is in relation to a 35% tariff on steel. That's the reality. It's really having a massive impact. I was just this morning at a site across the street from my office here in downtown Vancouver. They're just completing a build for $100 million. They said if they had to start that right now, it would be $140 million, and that's due to the cost of steel. So we've got a serious problem here in regards to these tariffs, and we've got to keep working on it.
You talk about certainty, and you know that in finance, that businesses look for certainty, capital looks for certainty. That's the big thing when you're especially when you're investing large sums of money, look for certainty. There's also, and this is from the Conservative Party of Canada here, talking about the Cowichan decision. I've also interviewed the Jeff Moyse, Aboriginal lawyer, and he said that the NDP chose not to argue a couple of things. What cloud do you think hangs over property, especially when fee simple properties that were sold by the Crown now could be subject to loss of title?
Well, I think it's important to point out that immediately upon this decision, the Attorney General chose to appeal and is moving forward with that right now. We need this clarified, and it's work that has to happen, and for the reasons that you've identified and more. So that's the work that we're doing right now, is to take this to court. And
then you and I have done an interview in the past. I think it's about a little over a year ago when you were, I think you were the Minister of Jobs and Innovation at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Forestry was in trouble then, and it seems like, some of the stuff coming out, especially, from Ravi, that Trump is the straw man for everything. There was problems prior to Trump, though, that we should acknowledge that our forestry we lost about 10,000 jobs over the past 2 years prior. And, Canfor said when they didn't move ahead with the Houston expansion, they closed Bear Lake, and then they cut some production. And they said themselves that BC is not investable. And I interviewed the Premier himself too, and it's a lot of it had to do with access to fiber. Is there any solutions for that going forward?
There are, but I'll first speak to your comment about Trump as a straw man. That's just not the case. I mean, the reality is these tariffs are having a massive impact, and they're on top of the already unfair duties that are being put on softwood lumber. Now, Trump didn't come out of nowhere. This growing sense of protectionism in the U.S. was present. In fact, Biden had protectionism. These unjustified duties have been around for a while, and Trump is just taking it further. We're looking at close to 50% on our lumber. This is
Softwood's
horrific.
Been an issue forever since Jean Chrétien. Softwood's been an issue forever.
Yeah. It's been a huge issue, and not just in British Columbia, but also in Quebec.
But Alberta seemed to do okay, though, because when we did that interview, Alberta's forestry, and I've worked in Alberta forestry in the past, they seem to get around it, and I've interviewed one of the VP from AP Planers, and they say it's access to fiber. That's their biggest complaint. And EB recognized that himself, is that we got to do something about permitting and access to fiber. Are we making any progress in access to fiber?
Yeah, I think so. And I know that the forestry sector is really feeling these impacts right now. There's pieces that we can control, and you've identified one of them, which is access to fiber. And there's a huge amount of work going on with this, both with the FII and within the Ministry of Forestry. But now there's this additional challenge. So forestry, unfortunately, is being hit from all sides.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask the big elephant in the room question, and it is the pipeline. Danielle Smith, the Premier, and David Eby kind of going at each other. And Carney talks about One Canada and then Team Canada, but the two of them seem to be going at each other in these projects. Hypothetically, what would that, if we do get a Northern Gateway pipeline, because there was a poll that came out, Angus Reid, that showed the majority of British Columbians even support this Northern Gateway pipeline. What would that mean economically from a finance perspective if we got that? Because that'd be a new port, and it would be, obviously building the pipeline and that. If we look at TMX, how much does TMX contribute to BC's GDP?
Yeah, I think the way to look at the financial question here is this. We've been doing a ton of work with nations to ensure that we can get LNG out and sold. And you've seen, we've already started shipping LNG from Kitimat. And these are really exciting projects that drive forward our GDP, that create jobs in British Columbia and in conjunction with First Nations. You take a look at Cedar LNG, for example. We've got so many projects in the pipe that are ready to go, LNG projects here in British Columbia that build out BC. And we've got arrangements with these nations who want these projects. It's not about the pipeline, it's about what's in the pipeline. Nations don't want bitumen flowing through their lands. They don't want it. And the coast nations don't want it. And my concern is the real economic risk here is that the pressure that we've got a minister from Alberta trotting around meeting with nations right now, putting pressure on them to try and get this done. My concern is this type of pressure will impede the work that we've been doing on getting LNG out to the coast. And we've got buyers. These are real projects with real proponents. That's not the case in what's happening in Alberta. The only proponent we have is Danielle Smith. So the real economic risk here is what's happening in Alberta.
I mean, I would say that there's that letter that was signed by, I think, 96 CEOs in that, all these oil and gas with a vested interest for sure.
Of course.
And then the big question, though, Trump is used as he's rightfully so, he's used as, we rely so much on the Americans, and then that heavy reliance has also put us in a really bad predicament. Is not Danielle Smith's wanting that pipeline reducing our reliance on the Americans? I mean, because right now the only place for this heavy oil to go is the United States. Without a pipeline to either east or west, there is no other market for the oil.
Well, I don't know if there's a market for the oil anyhow by the time it gets built. I mean, people are transitioning away from oil significantly right now. LNG, we've got buyers right now. We're exporting LNG to Korea. We're exporting LNG to Japan. This is very important to British Columbia's future and our economy. So I think the focus here to move away from that and jeopardize those relationships is the wrong focus. You know, if you go up to, I don't know if you've had a chance to go to the port of Prince Rupert, but it is humming. There's so much going on there, and there's opportunity to continue to grow. We've got a port identified now in Stewart. There's expansion in the ports happening downtown in Vancouver at the new, very likely to go forward, Roberts Bank, number 2. You know, there's so much opportunity here. I don't think that we should put the relationship with First Nations in jeopardy over a pipeline that has no proponent. It's just not a good decision.
Talk about one of the bigger things for you, copper. Copper is a big thing for British Columbia, and the copper at all-time highs, really in 5-year highs, and a lot of our copper is sold into Southeast Asia. So did the tariffs actually hurt us in that regard, or did they actually help us because it moved the price of copper up? Most of our copper is sold, and there is no tariff on just concentrate, is there?
Yeah, that's correct. And we've made an investment in Highland Valley Copper, which is expanding, as you know. BC is blessed with 17 critical minerals that we're very devoted to get out of the ground. We expect it's about $30 billion worth. And we're making things easier to get mining up and coming in British Columbia. There's been efforts to reduce the timelines on permitting in mines, and we've seen a result of a 38% reduction in timelines on permitting for mining. So it's copper, but many other things. Yeah, it is good news because these are important. This is how British Columbia is going to continue to build. You know, you've heard the Premier say, not only do we want to build BC, we want to build Canada, and we feel that we can be the economic driver in Canada. We're seeing huge risk now in the auto sector in both Ontario and Quebec, but what we're seeing in British Columbia is nothing but upside opportunity, and we're absolutely taking it full force. Unfortunately, I have to drop off for another interview.
Can I just ask one last question, though, because it's just on the copper thing? So the last question I'll ask you is, we saw Trilogy Metals, which is a Canadian company up in Alaska. Their stock shot up about 300% when the Americans invested about 10% into that stock as well, and also promised to build them a road. If you look at that example, is that a way to get some mining projects? Because there's lots. I was a controller at a mine site in a former life there. And I know a lot of the problems is just the delays, the timing, and it takes 20 years to get a mine from like exploration to actual production. If you look at that example where the government there is investing in that mine as well, building them a road, is that something that BC has in its sights as well to get some of these mines into production?
Absolutely. And I've been part of those conversations in regards to the infrastructure needed in mining. And let's talk about the North Coast Transmission Line. That's what it's about. That's making sure that these mines can get the power that they need. So absolutely, that's British Columbia's approach, and we're taking it full force right now.
Well, I thank you for your time, Brenda, and I'd love to do more of these. And see, it wasn't that bad, right?
I enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching Now Media.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.